Here you are. You've joined the United States Army, but there's a strange detail. No one notices your existence. You have no insignias, no recognition, and in the military hierarchy, you're practically invisible. But this isn't a mistake. It's completely intentional. This is the lowest rank in the Army, private. Your cold days begin at 5 in the morning with the traumatic sound of a bell, and after intense physical exercise, cleaning, and more training, in the mess hall everyone ignores you and no one speaks to you. But why this anonymity? And what happens when the training ends? Well, something disappointing. After 6 months, you're automatically promoted, and now you're a private second class. But there's a problem. It's not due to merit, it's not due to skill, and it's not even because someone noticed you. It happens simply because the system dictates it. And even worse, this new rank changes almost nothing. You're still following orders, still not making decisions, and still not really someone important within the hierarchy. So, if no one is evaluating you, how do you keep getting promoted? Can you rise in rank without anyone recognizing you? Interestingly, about a year later, the system does its job again and makes you a private first class. And although the title sounds better, the reality is that you still don't lead anyone. This is the third rank in the United States Army, and although you now have more experience, your job remains the same. Execute orders and perfect your skills. This is where some soldiers start to stand out, because not everyone reaches this rank the same way. If you joined with no prior experience, the promotion is automatic after a year. But if you have military training or even a 4-year college degree, you could start directly at this rank without going through the previous levels. Yes, the Army doesn't just look for strength, it also looks for preparation, but you still don't have real authority. For that, you have to move up one more step. The next rank is Specialist. This is where things start to get interesting. Technically, you're still not a non-commissioned officer, but you can now lead lower-ranking soldiers. You're expected to be an expert in your area, to know how to execute orders precisely, and to start taking on more leadership responsibilities. You could be in charge of preparing soldiers for nighttime patrol exercises in unfamiliar terrain, or supervising the maintenance of armored vehicles, making sure nothing fails. But here's a curious detail. Specialists have the same pay grade as a corporal, but they don't have the status of a non-commissioned officer. In other words, they may have more experience and knowledge, but without the formal authority to make decisions. Many soldiers get stuck in this rank because they don't take the next step. And this is where one of the most important decisions in a military career appears. Follow the technical path or the leadership path. If you choose leadership, the next step is corporal. This is one of the oldest ranks in the Army, established in 1775, and for a reason. The corporal is the foundation of military leadership. If the Army were a body, corporals would be the backbone. Without them, everything would collapse. From this point on, you no longer just receive orders. Now you train others, enforce discipline, and ensure Army standards are met. But getting here isn't easy. You need at least 26 months of service to complete the basic leadership course and to receive approval from your commanding officer. If you show potential, promotion can be accelerated. From here, the path becomes increasingly difficult, because being a good soldier is no longer enough. Now you have to be a good leader. If you succeed, you can become a sergeant, and here the rules completely change. Reaching sergeant isn't just a matter of time. This rank marks a crucial transition from a junior non-commissioned officer to a true leader within the Army. To be promoted, you need at least 36 months of service to complete the advanced leadership course and to excel in marksmanship, physical condition, and performance evaluations. And here's a surprising fact. You can be promoted to sergeant without ever having been a corporal. If you demonstrate exceptional leadership, the Army can skip you directly to this rank. But don't get too excited, because here the competition becomes brutal. Promotions are no longer automatic, and only the best move forward. And as you rise, the responsibility increases, and so does the number of soldiers under your command. Staff Sergeant. And this is where the rules change. Until now, the Army has trained you to obey, follow orders, and fulfill your duty. But from Sergeant First Class onward, obedience is no longer enough. Power begins to move in the shadows. Being the best soldier or the most disciplined is no longer enough. To be promoted, you need allies. You need influence. Recommendations from command aren't earned solely through effort. They're negotiated, built, and owed. And this is where many get stuck. You have the power to manage entire teams, supervise resources, and decide the fate of lower-ranking soldiers. Imagine you're at a base in Afghanistan. A convoy is delayed on its route, and there's no communication with them. The commanding officer is busy, the soldiers are waiting for orders, and the supplies might be at risk. You are the Sergeant First Class. Do you take action and organize a search team? Do you wait for further instructions and risk the mission? These types of decisions can mean the difference between a promotion or an abrupt end to your career. Promotion to Sergeant First Class doesn't just require experience, it requires something more. Your command's recommendation, 84 months of service, and completion of the primary leadership development course. But there's an uncomfortable truth. Being good is not enough. You may have done everything ranking required, but if you don't have the favor of your superiors, you'll simply stay stuck here, Sergeant First Class. You are no longer just a supervisor. Now, with 15 to 18 years of service, you become the backbone of the platoon. You supervise multiple Sergeant First Classes and serve as the connection between the enlisted soldiers and the officers. If a captain wants a mission carried out, you're the one who ensures it actually happens. Think of it this way. You're the one who decides whether a soldier is punished or given a second chance. The soldier who showed up late to formation, is he going through personal problems or just being lazy? Do you punish him or help him? Your judgment is what matters. But this is where politics comes into play. Now you don't just follow orders, you interpret them. A commander will ask you for results, but won't tell you how to achieve them. If a base in Iraq needs more security, you can increase patrols, redistribute resources, or even push to get more personnel. The decision is yours, and if you make the wrong one, you could be sending your men into disaster. The Master Sergeant, at pay grade E8, leaves behind direct action. Now you oversee entire battalions, advising commanders and managing the operational structure at a strategic level. Here's a curious fact. You could have 20 years of experience and still take orders from an officer with half your time in service. But make no mistake, many times that officer will do exactly what you suggest. This is the point where military bureaucracy becomes a weapon. Some use it to protect their soldiers, others to advance their own interests. There are those who manipulate evaluations, promote their allies, and destroy the careers of those they see as rivals. If you don't learn how to play this game, you won't get any further. But with the first sergeant, this all becomes ruthless. Only 1% of soldiers reach this rank. Here, you no longer just supervise logistics and discipline. Now you control the fate of every soldier under your command. If someone makes a mistake, you decide whether it's fixable or whether their career is over. If there's internal conflict in the unit, you decide how it gets resolved. If a promising soldier needs a chance, it's you who puts their name on the list. At this level, it's no longer just about experience or performance. It's about who supports you, who you've helped, and who owes you favors. Because the next ranks aren't earned through hard work, they're earned through something else. And those who don't understand that remain here forever. The Sergeant Major, at pay grade E9, no longer focuses on small units or direct mission execution. Now you're operating at strategic levels. Imagine an ongoing operation in the Pacific. The fuel supply is at risk, and logistics become chaotic. A high-ranking officer is looking for a solution, but the one who truly understands the operational structure is you. A mistake here could leave a unit stranded or a base without critical supplies, and if you don't see it coming, no one else will. Here comes the key difference. The Sergeant Major is a shadow, but the Command Sergeant Major is a presence. The Command Sergeant Major doesn't just operate at the battalion level. They are the direct connection between the soldiers and the highest-ranking officers. Their decisions affect thousands of soldiers. If there's a change in discipline policy, training, or deployments, their influence shapes how those rules are enforced. Think of it this way. If a general decides to implement a new training system, it could be a revolutionary reform or a complete disaster. If the Command Sergeant Major doesn't support it, morale drops. If they adapt it intelligently, the reform becomes a success. In essence, they can make a commander shine or fail. That's why the Department of the Army selects these sergeants with extreme care. Not just anyone makes it here. You must have demonstrated leadership, political skill, and absolute control over the troops. But above all others, there is only one man, the Sergeant Major of the Army. This is not just a rank, it's a position. There is only one in the entire United States Army. He is the personal advisor to the Chief of Staff and the only enlisted voice that reaches the highest command. This is a role of power, but also of risk. If you hold this position, your face is known, your words are recorded, and your decisions can become historic or disastrous. Here's something few people know. Although the Sergeant Major of the Army is technically still within the enlisted ranks, he holds protocol privileges above a lieutenant general. In strategic meetings, his opinion can carry more weight than an officer with 3 stars on their uniform. And this is where power changes hands, because right after this, we enter the territory of officers. The Warrant Officer 1 is the first level of a new world. They are not traditional commissioned officers, but they are no longer enlisted soldiers either. They are hybrids. Technically, they no longer answer to sergeants, but they also don't have the same level of authority as a lieutenant. These officers are selected from among the enlisted soldiers, but time in service is not enough. To enter this rank, you must submit a written application, obtain recommendations from your commanders, and be approved by the Secretary of the Army. At this level, your combat experience or leadership skills still matter, but what matters even more is who is willing to support you. Because at this level, it's no longer just about following orders, it's about deciding who gets to give them. This is where authority begins to transform. It's no longer just about executing orders or supervising troops. Here, knowledge is power. The warrant officer, too, is no longer an apprentice. Now they're an intermediate expert with real authority. They no longer simply advise commanders. They make decisions that can change the outcome of a mission. Imagine an intelligence operation in the Middle East. An infantry battalion is preparing for a night raid, but there's a problem. The satellite communication system is experiencing interference, and the commander doesn't know whether to proceed or abort. The warrant officer, too, a specialist in signal systems, is the only one in the room who truly understands what's happening. If they say it's safe to continue, the battalion goes in. If not, the mission stops. Here, the influence is subtle but absolute. You don't give direct orders, but what you say determines which orders are given. We go up a level, Warrant Officer 3. Now we're at a point where you don't just oversee a single unit, but multiple teams across an operational area. At this level, warrant officers are leaders in their field. Picture a military convoy transporting critical supplies through a war zone. The unit commander has the authority, but the Warrant Officer 3 decides how the mission is carried out. If they detect a logistical failure, they can reroute the convoy, change the paths, or even suspend the movement if the risk is too high. And the most important part, no one will question their decision because their technical knowledge surpasses that of the commissioned officers. But now things get even more interesting. The Warrant Officer 4 no longer deals just with tactics, but with strategy. This rank doesn't operate at the brigade or battalion level anymore. It functions across divisions, corps, and higher echelons. Here, you don't just apply expertise, you help define the Army's future in your area of specialization. For example, imagine you're an expert in air defense. A new type of enemy drone is wreaking havoc on the defense lines. Commissioned officers may discuss it in meetings, but you're the one who truly knows how to counter it. Your job isn't just to say, this won't work. It's to develop the new combat doctrine that will determine how the Army adapts to the threat. At the top of this structure, we find the Warrant Officer 5. This is not just a position, it's an anomaly. It's the rarest rank in the Army. So few exist that their names are known in strategic circles. These officers don't just advise, they shape the Army itself. When a general needs to understand how to modernize an attack helicopter fleet or integrate artificial intelligence into operations, they don't call a colonel, they call a Warrant Officer 5. At this point, you're no longer just a specialist, you're a war architect. But even at this level, there's still a ceiling, because after the warrant officers come the commissioned officers, and in this new world, influence changes completely. The second lieutenant is the entry point, the first to receive a commission and the first to lead. A platoon of 15 to 50 soldiers depends on their orders. But here's where reality hits. The NCOs under their command, like the platoon sergeant, have more experience, have seen combat, have led troops for years. And here lies the dilemma. If the second lieutenant doesn't prove competence quickly, they'll lose the respect of those who actually execute the orders. Some learn fast, others become forgotten names in after-action reports. The first lieutenant has survived that test. They still lead a platoon, but now they have the trust of their superiors. They're no longer the green officer who came to learn. Now, they're expected to teach. When a convoy is ambushed on an Afghan road, it's the first lieutenant who decides whether to fight or retreat. If ammunition supplies at the base run low, it's up to them to negotiate with logistics and secure more before it's too late. But being a platoon leader is only the beginning. A captain is something else entirely. Now, you don't lead a platoon, you lead an entire company. 150 soldiers. If before your responsibility was making sure a squad carried out its mission correctly, now you must ensure that a whole unit operates with precision. This is where the game changes, because a captain doesn't just lead soldiers, they manage the politics within the unit. If two lieutenants in your company are having conflicts, it's your job to control it before morale plummets. If the battalion's logistics don't allocate enough supplies, it's your job to pressure higher ranking officers to get more. And this is where things get even more interesting. The major, with the 04 rank, steps away from direct command of troops and begins operating at strategic levels. Now you're a staff officer in a battalion or brigade. You no longer execute missions, you design them. Imagine an infantry battalion deployed to a hostile region. It's the major who designs how the units will be positioned, what resources they'll need, and how the offensive will be executed. But here, power starts to become invisible. You're not giving direct orders, but the ones you give to company commanders will determine the fate of hundreds of soldiers. Then comes the lieutenant colonel. This is the point where leadership is no longer just a duty, it's absolute responsibility. Commanding a battalion means you are ultimately responsible for every life, every decision, every failure. If an operation goes wrong, the lieutenant colonel must answer to the high command. If morale declines, it's your leadership that determines whether the unit remains effective or collapses. At this point, your orders don't just affect soldiers, they affect the war itself. But there's still more, because after this, we enter the world where leadership is no longer just military power. This is where politics, influence, and global strategy start taking control. The colonel is the last link before crossing into the world of general officers. Under your command is an entire brigade, up to 5,000 soldiers, or specialized commands like legal, medical, or intelligence units. But being a colonel is not just about command, it's about being a war architect. Imagine your brigade is deployed to a foreign country. It's your job to decide how troops will move, how they'll interact with the local population, or how they'll deal with hidden threats around every corner. Fail to read the terrain, and a convoy may walk into a deadly ambush. Fail to understand local politics, and the population could turn against you. Fail to prepare for combat, and the casualties will be your responsibility. But if you do well, you move up to the highest levels of military power. This is where the brigadier general enters, the first general officer rank. Here, you no longer lead soldiers, you lead the war itself. Brigadier generals command combat brigades, joint task forces, and sometimes multinational units in conflict zones. They're in charge of 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers, along with tanks, artillery, and air support. Their role is crucial in high-risk conflicts. They transform strategic orders into tactical actions on the ground. Imagine a brigadier general in Afghanistan, leading an offensive against an insurgent stronghold. Their decision on when and how to strike can mean the difference between decisive victory or tactical disaster. If a battalion gets pinned under enemy fire, the brigadier general decides whether to send reinforcements, order a retreat, or risk a flanking maneuver. Decisions made in the war room can change the fate of thousands. The major general is the next evolution of that power. Now, you command an entire division, around 14,000 soldiers. A division is a self-sustaining military force with infantry, tanks, artillery, helicopters, and air defense systems. In a conventional war, divisions lead invasions and major battles. During World War II, major generals led entire divisions on D-Day, coordinating the attacks that eventually brought down the Third Reich. At this level, there is zero room for error. Every decision is reviewed by top-level leadership, and any mistake can cost you the promotion. Imagine you're a major general and receive intelligence reports of an enemy ambush in a combat zone. If you hesitate, hundreds of lives may be at stake. If you order an attack without the right information, you might be sending your troops straight into a deadly trap. Then comes the lieutenant general. At this stage, you don't lead just battles, you lead entire wars. You command army corps, multinational forces, and oversee operations spanning entire continents. Imagine being the commander of CENTCOM, the United States Central Command. Every airstrike in Syria, every troop deployment in Iraq, every covert op against terrorist cells runs through your desk. You command over 80,000 soldiers, Marines, pilots, and special forces in one of the most volatile regions in the world. If a US embassy is attacked in a hostile nation, you decide whether to send a SEAL team for extraction or launch a retaliatory strike. If an aircraft carrier enters enemy waters, you approve or cancel the mission. Brigadier generals and major generals take orders from you. You don't execute the war, you design it. But even here, there's still one more step: the general. This is where military leaders become legends. Only a handful of officers ever reach this rank, and when they do, their influence goes beyond the battlefield. They no longer just lead soldiers or plan missions. Their decisions affect economies, international treaties, and the global balance of power. They are the ones who sit in the White House Situation Room beside the President and Secretary of Defense, assessing threats that could trigger global conflict. A Chinese carrier in the South China Sea, a hypersonic missile in North Korea, a coup in Africa, everything passes through their analysis. If a general speaks, the world listens. And then there is the General of the Army, the highest rank, the rarest, the most feared. Only 9 men in US history have ever held this title. It is awarded only in times of total war, when the nation's very survival is at stake. Here, there are no debates, no bureaucracy. The General of the Army takes full control of the army and commands it without restriction. Douglas MacArthur, Dwight Eisenhower, George Marshall, men whose names shaped not just military history, but the history of the entire world. If you reach this point, you are no longer just a soldier, no longer just a leader. You are war in its purest form. Don't forget to support this type of content by subscribing to the channel and watching this other very interesting video.